Hello and welcome to this first lecture in the course Digital Media and Information Society. And this is also the first time I use the flipped classroom technique, where you actually have to listen to the lecture before you come to class, where we then discuss some of the issues in class or in groups depending on where you are at understanding what I will present and your readings. So first listen to this lecture and then go and do the readings, and then you're also going to answer 2 short questions to be uploaded before Thursday's lecture on Studentportalen, but more of that later. So today's lecture is about some core concepts in media theory and very contemporary concepts that are generating a lot of fuss right now. Media logics and mediatization, which everyone is talking about. And we're also going to talk about the case of political communication, since this is the article that I wrote together with Ulrike Klinger at the University of Zurich. So I'm first going to talk a little bit about how it is to live in media. Media Life is a book that was written 2012 by Mark Döss, and that we have used in this course, but due to the criticism of your previous students, we have changed this book. I just want to mention some that was in this book before we go into the core concepts of this lecture: media logics and mediatization. And then we dive into the article, which you will have the chance to dig deeper into by reading it before we meet on Thursday. So if we start with Media Life, the book by Mark Döss, he claims in this book from 2012 that we live in media. We live not with media, but in media. Media is like the water for the fishes in a fishbowl, and we're the fishes here. So it's like the air we breathe is all around us. We cannot live without it. It's everywhere. It's augmenting life, it's making life what it is. Think about things like augmented reality, how we can point our mobile phones to the stars in the sky in order to see what kind of star formations are up there. In this sense, media can augment reality, but there are many other ways in which media augments our life and augments our reality. I'm sure that you have been taking a lot of photos during the city walks or the introduction to Uppsala that you have posted on Instagram and Facebook, and in a sense enhancing, augmenting your life and your experiences as new students in Uppsala. And he also claims that it's an illusion that we can control media. Perhaps it's the other way around, that media controls us, but we will come into this when we talk about media logics, the idea that we actually adapt to the media. But more of that later. Now, one of the interesting arguments in Döss's book is the argument that media cannot be switched off. It's pervasive and ubiquitous, in the sense that he compares it to the very famous movie from 1998, The Truman Show, which I believe Jim Carrey got an Oscar for. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, which I would highly recommend, it's about this character, Truman, who is whose life is completely mediatized or mediated, both mediated and mediatized. We will get into the distinctions of these two concepts a little bit later in the lecture. That his life is a reality show. The only catch here is that he doesn't know, well, in the beginning of the movie, that his life is televised and that he is being watched by millions of people. And he lives inside this huge studio where he lives his life and gets filmed everything he does. And he's been taught that he's afraid of water, so he doesn't come close to the studio, so he cannot find the exit. But then, of course, in the end, he does find his exit, and the movie has a somewhat happy ending. The interesting part here, though, in Mark Deuce's account is that, according to him, there is this psychological disease or illness called the Truman Show syndrome, which is increasing in today's society. People believing that they are like this Truman, that they are constantly being watched and that their life is aired somewhere. And perhaps we are also contributing to this Truman Show syndrome, in the sense that we are broadcasting ourselves and our daily activity. Once again, think about how many pictures you have uploaded of your the activities you've been invited to partake in during your stay here in Uppsala. But today we don't have an exit. We cannot exit out of this studio we are finding ourselves in. It's like the fishes in the fishbowl cannot live without swim out of the water. We cannot leave this media world. So we cannot make sense of a world outside media. Our society and we as individuals are constantly mediated and mediatized. And here perhaps it's good to give a first definition or delineation between what it means to be mediated and mediatized. Well, mediation here, as some of you I'm sure are aware of, is about transmitting something into another space or another room, another time. If we, for example, take a photograph of us or a video of us and then transmit it into another place. For example, this lecture I'm holding now is mediated in the sense that you're not listening to me as I speak right now, but you're downloading this presentation later. Mediatized, on the other hand, means that we are changing our behavior because of the media that is around us. We're becoming mediatized. There is, for example, studies of birds who has changed their twittering because of the cell phone signals that are increasing in the world, in the cities. So the birds are changing their twittering because of the media, hence their twittering is becoming mediatized. Now, we are both mediating ourselves as well as changing our behavior because of media. As examples here in the pictures that you can see, just think of the mobile phone, how the mobile phone has changed the way we hang out with our friends and socialize. There is a study from Sweden, 2010, 4 years ago, that concluded that young people, don't remember exactly the time the group span now, I think it was from 15 to 20 years old, are spending more time with their friends on digital platforms than in real life or away from keyboard, so to speak. That they are chatting with their friends more, they have their friendship is more mediated in that sense than it is face to face. So we are becoming mediated and mediatized. And to the extent that perhaps we can also think of ourselves as you machines. Are we becoming machines or cyborgs, as in the famous cyborg manifesto by Donna Haraway in the 90s? Cyborg or you machines or you bots from the famous Swedish TV series. Real people, äkta människor, human robots, U-bots, U-machines, cyborgs. There are many names for the same thing here. But are we becoming dependent on the machine so that it becomes an extension of ourselves? Now, in the media diaries that you have been or should be uploading very soon, I've noticed that students since 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it started to become so dependent on their mobile phones that they couldn't imagine themselves without them. I could read stories in these media diaries how they had to go back home to get their phone and miss perhaps first section of a lecture because they couldn't live without their phone. It was an extension of themselves that they couldn't live without. Hence, the mobile phone had been, in a sense, become part of their body. They had become perhaps cyborgs. This we can discuss if you want, where to draw the delineation in the class. Other concepts here, just to mention them, Mediapolis, drawing on the concepts of Silverstone here, Roger Silverstone, that media underpin and overarch the experience of our everyday life. Telepresence, that the here and now diminishes in favor of communication elsewhere, and we are present through telecommunication. So we, instead of perhaps talking with our friends, we check the phone all the time. And I've been also reading papers and research articles that show how people at cafes increasingly interact with their mobile phone instead of interact with the friends they have in front of them. So they talk about the telepresence that becomes very important. The media sphere, that we're enclosed in this invisible electronic shell around us. I still think that Mark Deuce's metaphor of us being fishes in a fish bowl and the water being the media is a good way to describe this. And then mediascape, which is another term that Mark Deuces uses, of course, drawing on Arjun Apudarai's concepts, scape concepts here, that media shapes our imagined and co-created worlds. So, in a sense here, it's not too much to... It's not a very extreme argument to say that the media is becoming extremely important, to the extent that media becoming perhaps all there is. It's becoming the water around us, the air we breathe, and an increasingly important part of who we are. This is why I also think it's so interesting to take part of your media diaries. So this leads me into the concept of media logics. And I'm a little bit sad that you haven't been able to get hold of the book, since I changed Mark Deuce's book for this classic in the field after having discussions with your second year friends, having done this course last year, so when we changed the book. Anyhow, it's a classic in the field, and congratulations if you got hold of it. So what is this book about? I'm sure you heard the concept before. Now, the aim of the All Tide and Snow book is to understand the role of media in our lives. And this they achieve this aim by treating media as a form of communication that have particular logics of their own, or logic of their own. Now, this is a matter of great debate today, whether we should talk about media logic or media logics in plural, and I think that we have ended up talking about media logics in plural, even though All Tide and Snow in their original account from 1979 is a bit they use singular and plural they altered the use, and as you see in the title, it's in singular. So media logic, they say on page 240, function as a form through which events and ideas are interpreted and acted upon. So media has a logic that we adapt and ideas adapts to. So here we can see the first grains to the kind of account that Mark Deuce makes in his media life, that media is becoming increasingly important. And these ideas were started already here in the 1979, or perhaps even with Marshall McLuhan with the medium is the message in the 60s. Perhaps he was the first one who was making this argument. We can discuss in class also if you want. So media run underneath, through, and in the background of all our social structures, is everywhere, and we have to relate to it in somehow. It's part of the whole fabric of routine, everyday life, practice, and experiences. It's important here, I'm sorry for the typo I see here in the second sentence. Anyway, it's important here, and this is why I want you to read the original text here, because it's important to remember here that in their account, even though that they are sometimes a bit sloppy with whether they use logic in singular and plural, but in the original account, they are very clear that media logics are interactive and based on various elements. It's not a one-way relationship. It goes back and forth, and this is why I say this is important, because now when you read some of the criticism of Althide and Snow and the media logic argument, they claim that it's too media-centric, that it's about media dictating the reality of everything. Now, this is not really the case, and this is why I think it's so important that we actually take the time to read the classics in the field to see what they really said. Just a little bit of background here. For those of you familiar in media theory, you might be familiar also with the effect studies and uses and gratification tradition within media studies. Now, when media was first studied in the 50s with the radio, with Larsfeld studies in the US, for example, what they much studied then was the effects of media. What does media has for effect on its audience? So this is called the effect studies time in media studies. Now this was followed, it is argued, by a phase of uses and gratification. So where the focus was switched from looking at the effects of media to see how actually audience used media, that they wanted to become entertained, for example. Then they turned on the television and then saw a TV show and become entertained. Hence they had a need they wanted to gratify to become entertained, and this is why they used media. So this was two very different way of studying the media. Now, Althide and Snow attack both of these traditional way of studying the media. Both these effect studies, that media is supposed to have effects on people, but also this kind of that focus too much on the media side, that the users cannot do anything with the media. The media has certain effects, and it's the same effect for everyone. On the other hand, the uses and gratification approach perhaps places too much emphasis on the audience, that they just use media to gratify predetermined needs. Perhaps needs are created within the media. Perhaps we become influenced by the media in ways that that cannot be captured with this idea of uses and gratification. So it's important to understand within the traditional media and communication study where we can place their argument of media logic. So it comes as an attack on both of these traditions when in 1979. And I think also this is important and becomes somewhat forgotten in the critique of this book. And just to be completely sure, I put you the quote here from the book on page 15. It's not a case of media dictating terms to the rest of society, but an interaction between organized institutional behavior and media. In this interaction, the form of media logic has come to be accepted as the perspective through which various institutional problems are interpreted and solved. So here you have it on black and white. It's not as media-centric as the critics argue. Going on in the lecture here now, Stig Javard, a scholar from Copenhagen who's been writing a lot of media logics, and one of the few who's actually still using the concepts and not talking about mediatization, which we will talk a little bit later on here in the next slide. Actually, when he uses the term, and this is from a Nordicom article in 2008 that has been used widely in the field, he explicitly refers to the term media logic as something society and its institution to an increasing degree are submitted to or dependent on. As I said, it has been, this account has been attacked or critiqued for being too media-centric. Perhaps it's too media-centric, but it's not only media-centric. This we can discuss in class. What do you think? Is it too media-centric? I'm very interested to hear what you say. So instead, scholars now talk about mediatization. And there is this book from Knut Lundby, is professor now emeritus in Oslo. He just come up with a new book, 2014, and the updated version of this mediatization book from 2009 is the cover on the page. However, it's not in paperback and it's shit expensive, so I didn't want to include that in the reading list. So what does mediatization mean? Well, as I gave you my very crude definition before of mediatization as when we actually change our behavior because of media, then we can say we are mediatized. A bit more eloquent academic definition is done by the foreword by LSE, London School of Economics scholar Sonia Livingstone, when she talks about mediatization as a meta process by which everyday practices and social relations are historically shaped by mediating technologies and media organizations. And Friedrich Krotz at the University of Bremen, who is also running many large research projects of mediatization, kind of subscribe to this meta process where everything in a sense is shaped by mediating technologies. And I also find this very interesting, this definition, because this also in a sense is media-centric now. I don't know if you agree, but I think it's a bit media-centric, this definition. But it has been used to criticize one single type. Sorry, here you have a little bit of the text missing under the image, but one single type of media-based logic that supersedes all the logics. And this is Nick Coldry. Now he was at the Goldsmiths a college in London. Now he's back at London School of Economics. This is his contribution in this book, where he criticized media logic in favor of mediatization. And that he claims that social transformation are too heterogeneous to be reduced to a single media logic. Well, I mean, I completely agree with Coldry here, but I think he doesn't really engage with the original text when he makes this claim, because I don't think you can find this in the original book by Altheide and Snow. So there is no media logic independent of cultural and societal context. No. This is also Friedrich Kotz's way of criticizing media logic. We agree, and I also think that Altheide and Snow would agree, and this was not what was meant with the original concept. And perhaps the most fervent critic of the concept is Knut Lundby himself, where he criticizes media logics for its singularity, its linearity, and it being fixed, referring to rules and formats rather than to processes and forms of social interactions. So the question then is, can we talk about the media logic? Well, as you will notice when you read the article by Ulrike and me, we still do think that we can do that. But of course, we might be wrong. What do you think? So this leads me to the section on media logics and political communication. Now, as Altheide and Snow pointed out already in their original account, is that politics is one of the social institutions most closely aligned with the evolution of media forms, and thus bears the most notable marks of media influences. So media logics have clearly informed political styles, cases, issues, and even outcomes. Now, I put these two pictures here. The one is from Eurovision Song Contest, and in Malmö in 2013, and the other one is from, I think, the Democratic Party convention in the US 2008. Now, can you tell the difference? Which picture is which here? But this is, of course, as an illustration how media and media entertainment here, in particular, influences politics and the form of politics. Other examples are how there are studies showing how politicians adapt to the short sound bites of media in order for them to become quoted and to get seen in the media and uptaken in the media, and making statements that they phrase in a way that media organization will easier pick them up. And the Swedish Minister of Finance, or the Swedish Treasurer, Anders Borg, have also been accused for delivering twitterable phrases of 140 signs, so they will be easy to be twittered out. Can we then talk about the social media logic? Well, that is all about what Ulrike and I am trying to do in the article that you will read. So for us, the beginning of, well, the how to say, the starting point of this article is to use media logic as a theoretical concept to discuss the non-neutrality of social media platform without resorting to technological determinism or normalization. Now, I will explain what I mean with that. But the idea that social media are neutral is something, it's a discourse, it's something that has been around in media studies that we don't agree upon. When the internet came, there was this great expectations that it will change everything. This is often referred to as technological determinism. And researchers have been very interested in how it's been utilized by politicians. And part of the interest in the internet by politicians has been that it coincided with less civic participation or citizen participation and a growing dissatisfaction with representative democracy. Hence, politicians and civil servants saw the internet as a kind of magic elixir, and this is a quote from Jennifer Stromer Galley, an American scholar, who claimed that it, as like some kind of panacea, the internet would solve all the problems representative democracy had. It would, but first and foremost, it should be used to increase citizen participation. Now, these early utopic hopes or claims of the internet and its effects on the citizenry and democracy has been countered, and this is what is called often normalization theories. So later studies has been much more negative, suggesting that offline structures of political, economic, and other sources of power are mirrored online. It's the most famous journalist in mass media who has the biggest blogs, is those who have power and money offline, white middle-class men who are also the one who has power online. So then they say this is not, internet is not changing anything. It's just business as usual or politics as usual. This is often labeled as a normalization theory. But even though these studies have been around now for a while, researchers continue to be fascinated by the internet at the hands of political actors. And this is especially with the case and increasing use of social media platforms. So there is this sense that something is going on and something is changing when bringing politics to the online realms of social media. However, deterministic analysis and study designs have not fully succeeded in accounting for this. And this is also a claim that Miller will do, in that you will read for a later lecture. So, okay, internet hasn't changed everything, but something is changing. It's not like social media is neutral, which has been a discourse that's just starting to be countered and discussed within the research community, that social media is not neutral. But how can we discuss this non-neutrality without resorting to these kind of technological deterministic claims that social media will revolutionize everything and is behind everything? And this is where I think that media logics is an excellent theoretical framework to discuss social media as non-neutral, non-deterministic, but yeah, you will see when you read the chapter. So basically we argue that it contributes with a different theoretical framing, different from deterministic arguments that either portray the internet as a solution to all of the problem democracies are facing, or as merely reinforcing the existing political practices and power balances. So by conceiving of social media platforms as intertwined with the rise of a distinctly different, though overlapping, logics, me and Ulrike, we want to move away beyond framings of social media platforms as inherently good or bad, while at the same time avoiding to resort to an argument that they are merely neutral. And we think that the theory of media logics allows us to do this. So giving that media and communication landscapes are changing, and English is difficult sometimes, analogously with the theory of media logics, we outline in the paper the contours of something we suggest labeling a network media logic. And we argue here that social media platforms are characterized by different, though overlapping, logic from traditional mass media with regard to communication norms and practices related to media production, distribution, and usage. So we are in the article contrasting this new network media logic with mass media logic. And this is the model that we have in the paper, that if we look at media production, for example, we saw that within the mass media, it was kind of an expensive information selection and content generation that was done by professional journalists according to so-called news values. This is how information got produced in the area of mass media. What we see now is that since it doesn't require expensive journalism, it's more inexpensive, and you don't have to be a professional journalist to generate content, so it's done by lay users, and news values are not as important any longer. It's more according to the individual preferences that content gets generated or produced, and also to maximize attention. You want your stuff to go viral, so to speak. And how do you do that? If we look at distribution, we could see that in the era of mass media logic, content was selected by these expert professional opinions and gatekeepers on the journalists, and it was based on the established news values, and it was distributed often to a paying fixed audience of subscribers. So it was a completely different way that information was subscribed. And now we see that users or the audience are becoming more like intermediaries, distributing popular content like a chain letter within networks of like-minded others. You get the information, what is going on, because you have connected with your friends on Facebook and people you like, or celebrities you think are like yourself, and with like-minded others, and what they distribute on their walls is what you get into your news feed, and this is how, and perhaps you pass this on, perhaps you share this or retweets this. So this is a completely different way of distribution information. And then when it comes to media usage, we could see that in the era of mass media, there were more like location-bound mass audience with limited selective exposure oriented towards passive consumption and information based on this professional selection. We were sitting in front of our television and watching the news that someone had selected for us, professional journalism out of news values, or in front of the radio. Whereas today in the network media logic, we argue that media usage is more, we are using media more based on our interest and what our like-minded peer networks are interested in. So it becomes a very selective exposure. It's not that we all watch the same thing any longer. And it's more oriented towards interaction through practices of updating. So this is a little snapshot of the article, and we will in the article dwell more into the details of these different logics of production, distribution, and media usage, and also show a little bit how they overlap and how you can still see strands of mass media logics and perhaps even party logics, etc. So now I suggest that you go to Studentportalen and download the Klinger and Svensson article and read it. And when you have read this, and and after listening to this lecture here, perhaps there is still something that you didn't understand or didn't find particularly clear in this presentation. And perhaps there are some issues that you really caught your attention, that you thought like, wow, this is really interesting. I want to discuss this more in class. So I want you to just quite simply answer these two questions and upload it before the class, 9 o'clock. So I have 1 hour before the class to have a look at what you have said. And in order to shape the discussion that we're going to have in class accordingly. And here is important that you are not here to prove anything. You're not here to prove that you know everything. So if you don't understand, you have to tell me. This is not a test or something like that. I know that you come from very heterogeneous backgrounds. Some of you have perhaps talked a lot about mediatization and media logics and want to discuss details and more in-depth about this concept, and some of you, this is the first time you hear this concept and you perhaps do not really understand it and want to discuss this. And in order for you to get the best out of the lecture, I want you to discuss with like-minded. So for me to group you, it's important that you're honest, and I'm not going to judge you on this. And of course, if you have the Alt-Heiden's notebook, read this too for the lecture. And there is also an interesting lecture, 90 minutes in Princeton by Professor of Film and Media, Ib Bondebjerg, the University of Copenhagen, where he discusses mediatization of politics out of contemporary Scandinavian film and television. So if you're very fond of Danish television such as Borgen and these shows, you can have a look at that as well. This is not required though, it's extras for those of you who find the time and find it interesting. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you Thursday.